The first Spider-Man game was released on the Atari 2600, and wow, look at those graphics, truly a marvel. See what I did there? Anyways, the objective of the game is to scale skyscrapers and defuse bombs planted by Green Goblin with a finite web supply. Next up in 1984 was Quest Probe featuring Spider-Man on the Apple II. This was basically just a short graphic adventure game on OG Apple computers. It's very short and very confusing to play and even watch in modern day. Next up in 1989 is The Amazing Spider-Man and Captain America in Doctor Doom's Revenge, an absolutely atrocious side-scroller with piss-poor mechanics and no music. But at least you could play as Captain America. In 1990 came The Amazing Spider-Man, which is a platforming puzzle game for the Amiga. The game follows a story of Mary Jane getting kidnapped, a common plot point, by Mysterio, and Spider-Man must go through a bunch of movie sets to save her. Also in 1990 was Spider-Man for the original Game Boy, a side-scrolling beat-em-up where Mary Jane gets kidnapped by the Sinister Six, and Spider-Man has to take them down. In 1991 came Spider-Man vs. the Kingpin on the Sega Genesis. This game is a side-scrolling beat-em-up, and it's actually a pretty decent game. The game is about Kingpin arming a nuke in the city, and it's up to Spider-Man to disarm it by obtaining all 6 keys from various Spider-Man villains, all within 24 hours of in-game time. Also, Mary Jane is kidnapped halfway through, and there are multiple endings depending on how you beat the game. Next up in 1991 is The Amazing Spider-Man 2 on Game Boy, a side-scrolling platformer that follows Spider-Man trying to clear his name after being falsely accused of committing a bank robbery. The following year in 1992 came Spider-Man Return of the Sinister Six on NES and Sega Master System. A pretty generic Spider-Man side-scroller where Spider-Man has to take down the Sinister Six. Pretty standard. Also in 1992 on the SNES came Spider-Man and the X-Men in Arcade's Revenge, a game where some of the X-Men and Spider-Man get dragged into Arcade's murder world, and must each fight their own unique levels in order to escape and win. The final original Game Boy game came in 1993 with The Amazing Spider-Man 3 Invasion of the Spider Slayers. The game follows the same formula as the other 3 Game Boy Spider-Man games, and is based off the comic book series with the same name. In 1994 came Spider-Man and Venom Maximum Carnage on the SNES and Sega Genesis. This game is based on the comic series with the same name and is a Double Dragon style beat-em-up side-scroller. In 1995 came The Amazing Spider-Man Lethal Foes on the Super Famicom and was only released in Japan, and this game actually looks pretty phenomenal. Also in 1995 came one of the worst Spider-Man games ever, Venom and Spider-Man Separation Anxiety. The game's story is based off the comic series of the same name, and was met with loads of bad reviews about bad controls, repetitive gameplay, and poorly designed levels.
How about this one? I call it bold and brash. More like belongs in the trash!
The last game of 1995 was simply called Spider-Man on the SNES and Sega Genesis. The story follows 4 of Spider-Man's villains escaping from prison and he must stop them. The game actually has slightly different levels depending on which version you decide to play. The following year in 1996 came The Amazing Spider-Man Web of Fire for the Sega 32X. Once again, another Spider-Man side-scrolling beat-em-up which largely felt by many to be unfinished. The story follows Spider-Man taking down Hydra and the new Enforcers and save the city with some help from Daredevil. Finally, in the year 2000, we finally get the first 3D Spider-Man game. This game follows the story of Spider-Man trying to clear his name after becoming a criminal when a doppelganger steals a bunch of the supposedly reformed Dr. Octavius' science equipment, as well as take down a symbiote invasion being led by Doc Ock and Carnage. Don't try to jump off a roof in this game. In 2001, we received Spider-Man 2 The Sinister Six on the Game Boy Color, a side-scrolling beat-em-up, and the plot of the game revolves around the kidnapping of Aunt May and Spider-Man's efforts to save her from the Sinister Six. Also in 2001, we received a direct sequel to the 3D Spider-Man PS1 game called Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro, another 3D Spider-Man title which the story takes place directly after the events of the original, where Spider-Man must stop Electro from using a BioNexus device to make himself stupid powerful, while also taking care of a bunch of other villains. Spider-Man Enter Electro features more linear levels, but a more diverse story. Also, you still can't jump off of rooftops.
Wonderful!
The last Spider-Man game out of 2001 is Spider-Man Mysterio's Menace on the Game Boy Advance. The game's story takes place sometime after Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro, and the story involves Spider-Man having to take down a bunch of supervillains, led by Mysterio. In 2002, the first of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies was released, and with it came SpiderMan The Movie game, releasing on Xbox, PlayStation 2, and GameCube. This game's made in a very similar style as the original PS1 games, linear 3D beat-em-up game, mostly taking place indoors. The game's story is very loosely based on the original movie, and why can't I swing down here? In 2004, on the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and GameCube, we got one of the greatest superhero movie games of all time, Spider-Man 2. The game's story was based on the original Spider-Man 2 movie, but featured so many other villains outside from Doc Ock. This game was the first 3D free-roam Spider-Man game where you could swing around New York helping civilians, handling petty crimes, doing challenges. This game had so much content, on top of having an insanely fluid web swinging system. Oh yeah, and...
pizza time.
Next up in 2005 was Ultimate Spider-Man. This game was based on the Ultimate Spider-Man comic series and features both Spider-Man and Venom as playable characters. That's right, you can go from saving the civilians of Queens to, eating children. This game features a lot of the same mechanics as Spider-Man 2, but with a much shorter story and an awesome comic book style art direction. A year later in 2006 came Spider-Man Battle for New York City on the Nintendo DS. It's a 2.5D side-scrolling platformer, which is considered a prequel to Ultimate Spider-Man, and it is a reimagining of Spider-Man vs. Green Goblin in the Ultimate Universe. In 2007 came a regression in the Spider-Man games, with Spider-Man 3 releasing on Xbox 360 and PS3. This game follows a similar formula as the well-regarded Spider-Man 2, but comes up short graphically and mechanically. The story follows the original movie, but very loosely, much like Spider-Man 2, and oh my god, these character models. Also in 2007 came a very unique 3D Spider-Man game, SpiderMan Friend or Foe. It's a classic 3D beat-em-up Spider-Man game with many different playable characters ranging from Spider-Man to Black Cat to Green Goblin. Despite its uniqueness, however, critics found it to be too easy and repetitive. The following year in 2008 came another unique Spider-Man title, Spider-Man Web of Shadows. This game is a 3D open-world beat-em-up game with similar mechanics to the Spider-Man movie games. The game's story is about Spider-Man trying to stop a huge symbiote infestation in Manhattan. One of the coolest things about this game is the fact that you can switch from red suit to black suit Spider-Man, which gives you an entirely different moveset. Despite bad reviews from critics, this game has a huge cult following and is regarded as one of the most misunderstood Spider-Man games. In 2010 came one of my personal favorite Spider-Man games, Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions. This game's story revolves around Mysterio attempting to steal the Tablet of Order and Chaos, and Spider-Man breaking it, leading to Madam Web confronting Spider-Man and helping enlist the help of Spider-Men from 3 other universes to retrieve the fragments. All 4 Spider-Men are playable and each have their own unique level designs. Despite it being just a linear 3D beat-em-up platformer, it's an awesome play and was met by mostly positive reviews across the board. In 2011, we got a direct sequel to Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions with Spider-Man The Edge of Time. This game features only 2 playable Spider-Men, Amazing Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2099, and the game has a cause and effect type story where the actions of one Spider-Man affect the story in the others. This game was met with much harsher criticism than Shattered Dimensions, mostly due to repetitive gameplay. The following year in 2012 was the release of the Amazing Spider-Man movie, and with it, of course, came the Amazing Spider-Man movie game. This game attempted to go back to the 3D open-world roots of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man games, with Arkham Asylum-style free-flow combat. The game loosely follows the movie's story like most movie-based Spider-Man games, and the game was met with mixed to slightly positive reviews. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 released in 2014, and the game was so loosely based on the movie that it pretty much has its own unique story. The game was met with some harsh criticism for its graphics glitches and story. This was the last Spider-Man game published under the Activision license. We didn't get another Spider-Man game until 4 years later with Spider-Man on the PS4. The first genuinely good open-world 3D Spider-Man game since the PS2 era. The game has a fresh story, with the story taking place about 8 years after Peter Parker originally gets bitten by the spider. The game has some clean web swinging, good combat, and a good story, and even features some awesome Spidey gadgets. The game was met with great reviews and is regarded as one of the best superhero games to date. In 2020, on the PS5, we received the most recent Spider-Man game, Spider-Man Miles Morales. The game is all about Miles Morales Spider-Man a year after training with Peter Parker to master being the web slinger. The game has some beautiful graphics and fluid gameplay like the 2018 version. This game was met to similar reviews as the last, and hopefully future Spider-Man games can continue the upward trend Insomniac has started. And that's every Spider-Man game in under 12 minutes, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please consider leaving a like, hitting that subscribe button, and ringing the bell, because you really don't want to miss out. We do this every single week. If you want to see me do this with another game, let me know down in the comments, and hopefully I'll see all of you, beautiful people, next time.